The gymnasium fell silent as Marcus Rodriguez stepped onto the polished wooden floor. His military boots echoed through the vast space, drawing every eye toward the man who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. Sweat glistened on his forehead, not from exertion, but from the weight of expectation pressing down on his shoulders like a heavy pack during a desert march. Across the room, James Wellington adjusted his pristine red uniform, each button gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The Royal Guard's ceremonial sword hung at his side, a symbol of centuries of tradition and unwavering loyalty to the crown. His posture remained rigid, disciplined, as he had been trained since childhood. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been more striking. The charity event had brought together military personnel from different branches and nations, all gathered to raise funds for veterans struggling with post-traumatic stress. What started as a friendly competition between services had evolved into something more intense when Marcus and James were paired against each other in the final martial arts demonstration. Marcus rolled his shoulders, feeling the familiar ache in his left arm where shrapnel had torn through muscle and bone 2 years earlier. The doctor said he would never regain full strength, that his fighting days were over. Yet here he stood, representing not just the Marine Corps but every soldier who had been told they weren't good enough anymore. James observed his opponent with analytical precision. He had heard stories about American Marines, their reputation for tenacity and unconventional tactics. His own training emphasized control, precision, and honor above all else. The Royal Guard didn't just protect the monarchy, they embodied the very essence of British military excellence. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. Families of veterans sat in the front rows, children pointing excitedly at the 2 warriors. Reporters had gathered, expecting a simple exhibition match. None of them realized they were about to witness something far more profound than a mere demonstration of technique. Marcus caught sight of his daughter Sarah in the audience, her 8-year-old face beaming with pride. She had never seen her father in action, only heard stories of his bravery from her mother. This was his chance to show her that despite his injuries, despite the nightmares that still haunted his sleep, he remained the hero she believed him to be. James noticed his commanding officer, Colonel Harrison, watching intently from the side. The colonel had handpicked James for this event, trusting him to represent the Guard with dignity and skill. Failure was not an option when the honor of the regiment rested on his shoulders. The referee, a retired Navy SEAL, stepped between them. His weathered face bore the scars of countless battles, and his presence commanded immediate respect from both competitors. He explained the rules in a voice that carried the authority of someone who had seen real combat, not just ceremonial duty. As the 2 men faced each other, something unspoken passed between them. This wasn't about nationality or military branch anymore. It was about proving that warriors, regardless of their origins, could rise above their limitations and touch something greater than themselves. The crowd held its breath as Marcus and James bowed to each other, a gesture of mutual respect that transcended borders and uniforms. In that moment, they weren't enemies or rivals, but kindred spirits bound by the warrior's code that had guided soldiers throughout history. The silence stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest movement. Both men settled into their fighting stances, years of training taking over as conscious thought faded into instinct. The gymnasium had become an arena where 2 philosophies of combat would collide, where personal demons would be confronted, and where the true meaning of honor would be tested. The referee's hand dropped and the match began with explosive intensity. Marcus moved first, his Marine training kicking in as he launched a swift jab toward James's center mass. The Royal Guard deflected the strike with textbook precision, his movements flowing like water around stone. James countered with a measured strike aimed at Marcus's shoulder, testing his opponent's defensive capabilities. The Marine twisted away, using his combat experience to read the attack's trajectory. Their first exchange lasted mere seconds, but it revealed volumes about each man's approach to combat. The audience leaned forward as the 2 warriors began to circle each other, each looking for an opening. Marcus favored aggressive, direct attacks honed in the chaos of street-to-street fighting in Kabul. His style was practical, efficient, designed to end confrontations quickly and decisively. James embodied a more classical approach, his techniques refined through centuries of martial tradition. Every movement served a purpose, every strike calculated to maximize effect while maintaining perfect form. His training emphasized patience, Waiting for the opponent to create their own downfall, Sarah clutched her mother's hand as she watched her father dodge a particularly swift kick from James. She had never seen anyone move with such grace and power, and for the first time, she truly understood what it meant when people called her Daddy a warrior. Colonel Harrison nodded approvingly as James demonstrated the guard's superior conditioning and technique. Yet he couldn't help but admire the American's raw determination. Despite his obvious physical limitations, Marcus pressed forward with the relentless spirit that had made Marines legendary. The first real contact came when Marcus managed to land a glancing blow to James's ribs. The Royal Guard absorbed the impact without flinching, immediately responding with a precise elbow strike that Marcus barely avoided. The crowd gasped as both men momentarily broke apart, circling again with newfound respect for their opponent's abilities. Sweat began to bead on both fighters' foreheads as the intensity increased. Marcus could feel his injured arm beginning to protest, the old wound sending sharp reminders through his nervous system. He gritted his teeth, pushing through the pain as he had learned to do during long nights in the Afghan mountains. James noticed his opponent's slight favoring of one side and filed the information away for later use. Honor demanded that he fight his best fight, but tactical awareness was equally important. He adjusted his strategy, probing Marcus's defenses while maintaining his own impeccable guard. The psychological battle proved as intense as the physical one. Marcus fought not just against James but against the voices in his head that whispered he was damaged goods. A broken soldier, trying to recapture past glory. Every successful block or strike silenced those voices a little more. James struggled with his own internal conflicts. His training emphasized control and restraint, but something about Marcus's fierce determination awakened a primal competitive spirit he had never experienced. The American's refusal to yield challenged everything James thought he knew about combat and honor. A particularly aggressive exchange saw both men land simultaneous strikes, Marcus's fist connecting with James's shoulder, while the guard's knee found its mark against the Marine's thigh. They separated again, both breathing harder now, both beginning to understand that this exhibition had become something far more significant. The crowd erupted in cheers, no longer caring about national allegiances or military rivalries. They were witnessing two masters of their craft pushing each other to new heights, each man bringing out qualities in his opponent that might otherwise have remained hidden. As the second phase of their battle commenced, both warriors realized they had found something unexpected in each other, a worthy adversary who would demand nothing less than their absolute best. The middle phase of their encounter brought a new level of intensity that neither man had anticipated. Marcus began to adapt to James's classical style, using his battlefield experience to find gaps in the guard's perfect technique. His movements became more calculated, less wild, as he learned to respect his opponent's defensive mastery. James found himself forced to abandon some of his formal training as Marcus's unpredictable combinations challenged his traditional responses. The Marine's creativity in combat was unlike anything he had faced in years of ceremonial competitions. Each exchange taught him something new about the fluid nature of real fighting. A collective gasp rose from the audience when Marcus executed a perfect takedown attempt, only to have James counter with a throw that sent the Marine rolling across the mat. Both men recovered quickly, their mutual respect growing with each passing moment. The exhibition had transformed into a genuine test of skill and willpower. Sarah watched her father rise from the mat with tears in her eyes, not from sadness, but from pride. She had never seen him move with such purpose and determination. Every time he got knocked down, he bounced back stronger, embodying the never-quit attitude that defined the Marines. The veteran families in the audience began to cheer more loudly, recognizing something profound happening before their eyes. Many had sons and daughters struggling with similar challenges, trying to prove their worth despite injuries and trauma. Marcus's resilience spoke to their own battles. Colonel Harrison found himself divided between professional pride and genuine admiration. James was performing magnificently, showcasing the Guard's elite training and unwavering discipline. Yet the American's heart and determination reminded him why he had chosen military service decades earlier. Pain shot through Marcus's injured arm as he blocked a particularly forceful strike from James. For a moment his vision blurred, and memories of the explosion that had wounded him flashed through his mind. The screams of his fellow Marines, the taste of dust and blood, the certainty that he would never be whole again. But then he saw Sarah's face in the crowd, saw the belief in her eyes and the pain transformed into fuel. He had survived that day in Afghanistan not to give up now, but to prove that survival meant more than just breathing. It meant living fully, fighting completely, never accepting defeat. James pressed his advantage as he sensed Marcus's momentary weakness, launching a series of precise strikes designed to overwhelm his opponent's defenses. Yet something in the Marine's eyes warned him that the wounded warrior was far from finished. There was a depth of experience there that no amount of training could replicate. The turning point came when Marcus deliberately took a hit to land one of his own, trading James's perfectly executed technique for a raw, powerful blow that staggered the Royal Guard. It was a veteran's move, sacrificing form for effect, choosing pain over prettiness. James stumbled backward, surprised not by the impact but by the calculated nature of the exchange. This American was teaching him something about combat that years of formal instruction had never revealed. Sometimes winning required accepting loss, sometimes strength came from embracing weakness. The crowd roared its approval as both men stood facing each other, bloodied but unbowed. Neither had gained a clear advantage, but both had discovered something valuable about themselves and their opponent. The exhibition was becoming a journey of mutual discovery. Marcus wiped blood from his lip and smiled grimly. He had found his rhythm now, learned to work within his limitations while maximizing his strengths. The pain in his arm had become just another factor to manage, no different from wind or terrain or any other battlefield condition. James adjusted his stance, his movements now incorporating lessons learned from their exchanges. The rigid perfection of his early technique had given way to something more flexible, more adaptive. He was becoming a better fighter by fighting this particular opponent. The fourth phase of their battle brought both men to their physical and mental limits. Exhaustion began to creep into their movements, but neither warrior showed any sign of yielding. Marcus's injured arm throbbed with every block and strike, yet he continued to press forward, with the relentless determination that had carried him through 3 combat deployments. James felt his perfectly conditioned muscles beginning to protest as the American's unconventional style forced him to work harder than any training session had ever demanded. The Marine's ability to adapt and improvise challenged every assumption he had made about proper fighting technique. The audience had grown silent again, sensing that something profound was unfolding before them. Veterans who had seen real combat recognized the authenticity of what they were witnessing. This was no longer an exhibition but a genuine test of 2 warriors' souls. Marcus's wife, Catherine, watched with a mixture of pride and concern as her husband pushed himself beyond what his doctors had said was possible. She remembered the dark months after his injury when he had believed his fighting days were over, when depression had nearly claimed him more completely than enemy fire ever had. A young veteran in a wheelchair near the front row found himself leaning forward, completely absorbed in Marcus's struggle. He had lost both legs to an IED 3 years earlier, and had spent every day since questioning whether he still had value as a warrior. Watching the Marine fight with obvious physical limitations gave him hope he hadn't felt in months. James's mother, visiting from London, clutched her handkerchief as she watched her son face the greatest challenge of his career. She had seen him win countless competitions and ceremonies, but never had she witnessed him dig this deep into his reserves of strength and determination. The intensity reached a crescendo when both men simultaneously landed devastating strikes, Marcus's hook connecting with James's jaw while the guard's uppercut found the Marine's solar plexus. Both warriors staggered but refused to fall, their mutual respect now forged in shared pain and exhaustion. In that moment of mutual impact, something clicked for both fighters. They were no longer fighting each other but alongside each other, pushing one another toward excellence neither could achieve alone. The competition had become collaboration, each man bringing out the best in his opponent. Marcus realized that his injury, rather than being a limitation, had taught him to fight smarter and more efficiently. Every movement had to count because he couldn't afford to waste energy. His disability had become a different kind of strength, forcing innovation and creativity that his younger, healthier self had never possessed. James understood that his pursuit of perfect technique had sometimes come at the expense of real effectiveness. The American's raw, practical approach was teaching him that true mastery meant adapting to circumstances, not forcing circumstances to adapt to predetermined techniques. The crowd began to sense the shift in dynamics as both men's movements became more fluid, more synchronized. They were learning from each other in real time, their fighting styles beginning to blend and evolve as the exchange continued. Sarah watched her father's face transform from grim determination to something approaching joy. Despite the obvious pain and exhaustion, he was smiling slightly, completely absorbed in the challenge before him. This was who he truly was beneath the injuries and the nightmares. Colonel Harrison found himself mentally taking notes as he watched James incorporate lessons from the American's approach. The guards' training would benefit from understanding how real combat experience translated into practical fighting wisdom. Neither man was winning in any traditional sense, yet both were achieving something far more valuable than victory. They were proving to themselves and everyone watching that true warriors weren't defined by their limitations but by their refusal to be limited by anything external to their will. As their encounter entered its most crucial phase, both men had transcended their original intentions and found themselves in uncharted territory. The gymnasium had become a sacred space where two different philosophies of warfare were merging into something entirely new and beautiful. Marcus felt a strange sense of peace wash over him as he moved. The constant background noise of his war-damaged psyche had quieted to a whisper. For the first time since his injury, he felt completely present in his own body, no longer fighting against his limitations but working with them as natural parts of his being. James experienced a similar transformation as his rigid adherence to form gave way to intuitive flow. The American's influence had unlocked something primal within him, a warrior's instinct that centuries of ceremonial duty had never fully awakened. He was discovering who he might have been if born in different circumstances. The two men began to move together with an almost choreographed precision, their attacks and defenses flowing seamlessly into each other. What had started as opposition was becoming harmony, each fighter's strengths complementing the other's weaknesses in ways that neither had anticipated. Dr. Patricia Williams, a military psychiatrist in the audience, observed with professional fascination as both men exhibited signs of what she recognized as peak performance states. They had moved beyond conscious technique into pure instinctual response, their training and experience merging into something approaching art. The veteran children in the audience watched, with wide eyes as their parents' struggles, with injury and trauma played out in a completely different context. Here was proof that damage didn't mean defeat, that adaptation could lead to new forms of strength rather than simply accommodation of weakness. Marcus's breathing had found a rhythm that perfectly matched his movements, each exhale timed with his strikes, each inhale drawing power from some deep well he had forgotten existed. The meditation techniques his therapist had taught him for managing PTSD were now serving him in combat, creating calm within chaos. James felt his heartbeat synchronize with the flow of battle, his pulse steady and strong despite the physical demands being placed on his body. The discipline of his royal training was revealing its true purpose, not to create rigid automatons, but to forge warriors capable of maintaining clarity under the most extreme pressures. A moment of perfect understanding passed between them when their eyes met during a brief pause in the action. Both men recognized that they had found something rare and precious in each other, a worthy opponent who demanded and inspired their absolute best efforts. The audience sensed the shift from competition to celebration as the two warriors began to feed off each other's energy, rather than simply trying to overcome it. Their movements became more elaborate, more creative, as if they were composing a symphony of motion together. Marcus's injured arm, which had been a source of weakness and frustration for 2 years, suddenly felt like an integral part of his fighting style. The limited range of motion forced him to be more creative with angles and timing, creating opportunities that his two-armed younger self had never discovered. James found himself abandoning techniques that had earned him countless medals and commendations, in favor of movements that felt more honest, more connected to his opponent's energy. The American's practical approach was teaching him that effectiveness mattered more than appearance. The crowd began to realize they were witnessing something that transcended sport or competition. This was therapy. This was healing. This was two damaged souls finding wholeness through their willingness to face each other completely and honestly. Neither man was thinking about winning anymore. They were fully engaged in the pure joy of movement, the deep satisfaction of meeting a challenge that demanded everything they had to give. Victory had become irrelevant compared to the richness of the experience itself. As their dance of combat continued, both warriors understood that they were creating something beautiful together, something that neither could achieve alone. Their battle had become a collaboration in the truest sense, each man serving as both teacher and student in a masterclass of human potential. The climactic moments of their encounter arrived not with explosive violence but with profound understanding. Both men had pushed themselves beyond exhaustion into a state where pure will maintained their movements. Yet neither showed any intention of stopping, both recognizing that they had found something too valuable to abandon. Marcus felt tears mixing with sweat on his face as emotions he had suppressed for years finally found release through physical expression. Every strike he threw carried away a piece of the guilt and anger he had carried since Afghanistan. Every block James executed seemed to absorb and transform that negative energy into something constructive. James experienced his own emotional breakthrough as the American's raw honesty broke down barriers he hadn't even realized he had constructed. The rigid control that had defined his entire life began to soften, allowing space for spontaneity and genuine feeling that he had never permitted himself to experience. The audience had become completely silent, sensing the sacred nature of what was unfolding before them. Even the children seemed to understand that something important was happening, their usual restlessness replaced by focused attention. Catherine Rodriguez found herself crying as she watched her husband transform before her eyes. The bitter, withdrawn man who had returned from war was gradually being replaced by someone who resembled the passionate, determined Marine she had fallen in love with years earlier. A group of royal guards who had come to support James exchanged meaningful glances as they witnessed their colleague's evolution. They had always respected his technical skill, but now they were seeing the heart and soul that had been hidden beneath layers of protocol and tradition. The turning point came when both men simultaneously reached the limits of their physical capabilities. Marcus's injured arm finally gave out completely, hanging useless at his side while James's legs began to shake from exhaustion. Yet neither man stepped back or called for a halt. Instead, Marcus adapted instantly to fighting one-handed, his movements becoming even more fluid and creative as necessity forced innovation. James found new reserves of strength by abandoning his perfect stance and fighting from whatever position. The flow of combat demanded their continued exchange with such obvious limitations, inspired something approaching reverence in the watching crowd. Here was proof that human spirit could transcend physical constraints, that determination could find ways to express itself regardless of circumstances. Dr. Williams recognized the phenomenon she was witnessing as post-traumatic growth, the process by which individuals sometimes emerged from devastating experiences stronger and more capable than before. Both men were demonstrating that trauma could become a teacher, rather than simply a burden. The local news reporter who had come, expecting a simple sports story, found herself documenting something far more profound. Her camera captured moments of pure human triumph that would resonate far beyond the military community. Marcus's movements with one functioning arm displayed a grace and efficiency that amazed everyone present. His disability had forced him to discover possibilities that able-bodied fighters might never explore. Limitation had become liberation through acceptance and adaptation. James's abandonment of rigid form in favor of responsive flow revealed capabilities that years of perfect training had never developed. His willingness to be vulnerable and imperfect was paradoxically making him more formidable than his technical perfection ever had. Both men began to laugh as they fought, not from joy at their opponent's struggles, but from pure delight at the discovery of new possibilities within themselves. Their laughter was infectious, spreading through the audience like ripples in a pond. The referee, who had presided over hundreds of matches, found himself reluctant to call time even though the scheduled duration had long since passed. He understood that ending this encounter prematurely would rob everyone present of witnessing something that might never happen again. Neither Marcus nor James was thinking about the clock or the rules anymore. They were completely absorbed in exploring the boundaries of their own potential, using each other as mirrors to reflect back capabilities they had never imagined possessing. The climactic moments of their encounter arrived not with explosive violence, but with profound understanding. Both men had pushed themselves beyond exhaustion into a state where pure will maintained their movements. Yet neither showed any intention of stopping, both recognizing that they had found something too valuable to abandon. Marcus felt tears mixing with sweat on his face, as emotions he had suppressed for years finally found release through physical expression. Every strike he threw carried away a piece of the guilt and anger he had carried since Afghanistan. Every block James executed seemed to absorb and transform that negative energy into something constructive. James experienced his own emotional breakthrough as the American's raw honesty broke down barriers he hadn't even realized he had constructed. The rigid control that had defined his entire life began to soften, allowing space for spontaneity and genuine feeling that he had never permitted himself to experience. The audience had become completely silent, sensing the sacred nature of what was unfolding before them. Even the children seemed to understand that something important was happening, their usual restlessness replaced by focused attention. Catherine Rodriguez found herself crying as she watched her husband transform before her eyes. The bitter, withdrawn man who had returned from war was gradually being replaced by someone who resembled the passionate, determined Marine she had fallen in love with years earlier. A group of royal guards who had come to support James exchanged meaningful glances as they witnessed their colleague's evolution. They had always respected his technical skill, but now they were seeing the heart and soul that had been hidden beneath layers of protocol and tradition. The turning point came when both men simultaneously reached the limits of their physical capabilities. Marcus's injured arm finally gave out completely, hanging useless at his side while James's legs began to shake from exhaustion. Yet neither man stepped back or called for a halt. Instead, Marcus adapted instantly to fighting one-handed, his movements becoming even more fluid and creative as necessity forced innovation. James found new reserves of strength by abandoning his perfect stance and fighting from whatever position. The flow of combat demanded their continued exchange with such obvious limitations, inspired something approaching reverence in the watching crowd. Here was proof that human spirit could transcend physical constraints, that determination could find ways to express itself regardless of circumstances. Dr. Williams recognized the phenomenon she was witnessing as post-traumatic growth, the process by which individuals sometimes emerged from devastating experiences stronger and more capable than before. Both men were demonstrating that trauma could become a teacher rather than simply a burden. The local news reporter who had come, expecting a simple sports story, found herself documenting something far more profound. Her camera captured moments of pure human triumph that would resonate far beyond the military community. Marcus's movements with one functioning arm displayed a grace and efficiency that amazed everyone present. His disability had forced him to discover possibilities that able-bodied fighters might never explore. Limitation had become liberation through acceptance and adaptation. James's abandonment of rigid form in favor of responsive flow revealed capabilities that years of perfect training had never developed. His willingness to be vulnerable and imperfect was paradoxically making him more formidable than his technical perfection ever had. Both men began to laugh as they fought, not from joy at their opponent's struggles but from pure delight at the discovery of new possibilities within themselves. Their laughter was infectious, spreading through the audience like ripples in a pond. The referee, who had presided over hundreds of matches, found himself reluctant to call time even though the scheduled duration had long since passed. He understood that ending this encounter prematurely would rob everyone present of witnessing something that might never happen again. Neither Marcus nor James was thinking about the clock or the rules anymore. They were completely absorbed in exploring the boundaries of their own potential, using each other as mirrors to reflect back capabilities they had never imagined possessing.